Trump just disclosing that he's earned over $1 billion from his crypto ventures. Now, this is according to an annual financial disclosure form that just came out, about 900 pages. So there's a lot in there. But it does include this: more than $526 million in income from World Liberty Financial, which is a crypto venture Trump co-founded with his son. So take a look at this chart by top economic analyst Steve Ratner. He actually created this. Steve did before tonight's disclosure. I was looking at it. Then this happened. It was like, wait, we got to look at this. So let me tell you what it says. So what Steve did is put in blue how much money Trump's family has gained from crypto. That's the upper line there. In red, that's the line of how much investors have lost. About the same amount, more than $2 billion. Out front now, Ty Cobb. He is the former Trump White House lawyer. Ty, pretty interesting there when you look at that chart and how much Trump has made and how much everyone else has lost. What is your reaction to the scale of what we're seeing in this disclosure, of how much Trump is earning from these crypto ventures? Over $1 billion last year alone, right? This isn't a cumulative number. It's in 1 year. An industry he's actively promoted and supported and done policy and executive orders related to. Is it legal?
I don't believe so. Certainly, I don't think it was contemplated by the founders when they created the Emoluments Clause. I do think that one of the line items, of course, is the commemorative coins. Several $100 million of income related to those coins. How can that be anything other than trading on his image and likeness in violation of the Emoluments Clause? With regard to the crypto, obviously that's, it's a slimy industry. Certainly the way he's going around it, where he creates policies that can only enrich himself and his family, is something that I think the average American should be staggered by. But you mentioned the scale, and I think the scale here is just, it's intentional. There's no question. I mean, we are seeing the greatest onslaught of corruption in the history of mankind in the last 18 months. We have the $1.8 billion that he and Todd Blanche tried to take from the American taxpayers through the phony settlement of a contrived controversy with which he was going to pay off his friends. This is somebody who every day is devoted to the accumulation of wealth and power. This is, you said, is 900. I think it's 937 pages. I could be off by a few, but it's got to be the longest disclosure in the history of the American presidency. And when you talk about the scale, you've got Hunter Biden, who if they traced every dollar that he was accused of ever having, he couldn't ante in the game that Trump is playing. Trump is playing with billions. They were playing with millions. And this disclosure, on top of the disclosure that he issued last month, where he listed recent trades, up to $750 million in trades, many of which involved government contractors. So the grift is on. It's stunning.
It's stunning, and you use the word, staggering, and it truly is just the scale of it, as you point out, Ty. I also want to point out the New York Post, obviously conservative editorial board there, and in a rare rebuke, they've just published a column titled "Hunter Biden-Style Sleaze is just as slimy when the Trump boys do it." They go on to call what's happening here the shame of the nation. And they say it stinks to high heaven. Now, specifically what they're talking about, Ty, here, because it's hard to keep track of all of these deals. This one that they're writing this editorial about is the $1 billion mining deal we just found out between Trump and Kazakhstan that Trump's sons stand to profit from, according to the New York Times. And the New York Times goes on to report that there are at least 14 companies, 14, tied to Trump and Howard Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary's son, actively working with the federal government right now on critical mining deals, making incredible amounts of money. I mean, do you think that I would imagine you agree that with the New York Post that it stinks to high heaven and it's the shame of the nation.
It is the shame of the nation, and people should be paying attention. I mean, look back at the Iran war. Shouldn't have been started, but once it was started, what did we learn? We learned that the Trump sons have a drone company and become a huge government contractor. You hear this Kazakhstan deal announced. It was announced in November of 2025 when the $1.6 billion in financing was disclosed. What we didn't know was that the Trump sons, just a few weeks earlier, actually just days before the deal was announced, had acquired an interest in a company that had a substantial part of that deal, and they've only got close. They've only gotten closer corporately with the people that are involved in that deal. So, we see the 14 companies that you were talking about that the Trump sons or the Lutnick sons, have an interest in. The amount of guaranteed financing from the United States government for the 14 companies that are pursuing those deals, $9 billion. So yes, people should pay attention. It is staggering. It does stink. And I think when the Democrats take Congress, which hopefully they will, we'll get some answers as to how this all came about. And hopefully people will start to pay attention.
I mean, $9 billion. Now, of course, what we hear from the Trump sons will not be surprising. Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. told the New York Times they weren't involved in the specifics of this billion-dollar deal. Eric Trump says he's been a passive investor with absolutely no management role. Now, the New York Post says it comes after Don Jr. and other Republicans spent years, obviously, bashing Hunter Biden's work with Burisma. But, what I'm curious about, Ty, is when we keep hearing again and again from whether it's the Trump sons, Lutnick sons, they don't know the details. They're passive investors. It's not the first time we've heard this.
No, and just because that they're not wearing a hard hat with a lantern or using a pick, that doesn't mean that this isn't their deal. They're in line to make millions and millions of dollars. The Lutnicks have already made millions of dollars in terms of the fees that they've charged for financing this deal. So they can try to deny their involvement all they want, but the reality is their companies are in these deals. And they're benefiting from what the companies earn in terms of revenue and profit.
New York Times investigation found that the families of President Trump and the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick stand to profit from a $1.6 billion mining deal with Kazakhstan. Last year, the president, Secretary Lutnick, signed a deal with Kazakhstan that gave a little-known American company access to one of the world's largest untapped reserves of tungsten, critical metal needed to make missile warheads, fighter jets, and computer chips. Within weeks, the sons of both Trump and Lutnick also became financially connected to the deal. The Times is exclusively reporting one or both families now have financial ties to at least 14 companies involved in critical mining deals with the government. Joining me now is New York Times investigative reporter Eric Lipton, who's on the byline by that report. So, Eric, can you just walk us through the key points of your reporting here?
Well, we've already reported about how the Trump family moved into cryptocurrency and has made, more than $1 billion, most likely. They separately are now working as a defense contractor through Don Jr. And here's a whole entire new landscape that the family is looking to make money, and that's in the critical metals. The United States is investing, tens of billions of dollars to try to increase the supply of these metals because China is restricting access to them. They are very vital to the U.S. economy. And so it makes sense that this is something that was started in the Biden administration, that this be done. But at the same time as U.S. government is moving to put tens of billions of dollars into companies to help them, build out new mines in the United States and around the world, the Trump sons have started to invest in the same sector, not only in the sector, but in some of the companies that the United States government is backing. And separately, the family of Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, is helping a bunch of these companies raise capital in the private sector. So both of them are touching these deals. Now, the Lutnick family is not actually directly involved in the Kazakhstan deal, but they're helping one of the partners in the Kazakhstan deal raise more than $200 million in just around the same time as Dad Lutnick was helping negotiate something that was going to benefit the same businessman. So, what you're seeing, a crossing of interest of the government actions and the family private interest, which is something we've seen a number of times in this administration, but it's quite unusual in American history.
And there's an Australia-born rabbi somehow at the center of this, according to your reporting.
That's right. So there's an Australian executive who is in the mining sector, and he's the one that negotiated access in Kazakhstan to these deals. And he also was the co-founder of a separate company called USA Rare Earths, and he's also a shareholder there that's also slated to get billions of dollars. And Lutnick went out of his way to try to get the Kazakhstan government to give this contract to his company. So he's benefiting from potentially as much as like $5 billion worth of U.S. assistance. his business partners include Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. So it's just, again, it's very unusual to see direct financial interest from the family of the president and from the Commerce Secretary that are intermixed with some of these, enormous deals with taxpayer dollars on the line.
At the end of the day, I mean, are there any limits to what they can do? I mean, is anybody going? Yeah, is there any oversight, any regulatory agency going to stop them?
I'm sure that there will be Democrats in Congress that will send letters asking for information about this, which will probably not be responded to. There's not going to be any investigation by the current administration. And none of this is actually necessarily explicitly illegal, because Lutnick's two sons are adults and they have their own businesses. And the president, under law, has no conflicts of interest. He's exempt from the criminal conflict of interest law. So, there certainly is something that could be investigated to see whether or not there was inside information given to the Trump sons, from the government or from someone in the government, and that would be inappropriate, but it's unclear if it would be explicitly illegal.
And what has the White House said about your reporting?
They said that the president has no conflicts of interest and that his sons are businessmen who are entitled to pursue whatever business they want to, which is, it's basically, they have rejected again and again and again. Every time, we or other news organizations have written stories that examine the overlaps, they say that there are no conflicts and that the president's sons are entitled to pursue whatever, profits they want.
Karen, I mean, obviously we know the president's been raking in a lot of money. It's amazing to see the details.
Yeah.
Even those Bibles he's been hawking have brought in like $200,000 plus.
Yeah, he's doing very well. The presidency has been very good for his bottom line. And, as I've always said, this is a coin-operated presidency, really. And you just put money in and to give to him, and then he gives you other things. And this is exactly what's happening with the crypto stuff, which is he's getting a fee no matter what, even though the value of the crypto has gone down, 83%. So everybody else loses. So he's taking from the people who buy it. And at the same time, this deal with the UAE is just astonishing. They're getting what they need for what is essentially, they're paying him in order to get something else. And so he can do this all day long. They're doing it in Kazakhstan. The New York Times had a great piece about that. They're doing it all over the place, no matter where they are.
Yeah, right. That's another deal
that
they're making in Kazakhstan, that the Trump's sons are involved with a whole bunch of other businesses related to it.
Well, everywhere. What they do is they go in advance of Trump showing up and do some kind of deal with whatever country. It doesn't matter. They go around from country to country, shaking people down. This is, it's a VIG is what's happening here. And if you know where that term comes from, that's exactly what's happening here. He's getting a VIG for everything he does as president.
Yeah, it's a loan sharking term, or mafia term too. Jeff, does all this raise any legal concerns or just certainly ethical concerns, but he can do this, right?
Well, the Supreme Court has said that any official action he takes may not be the subject of criminal charges, and it can't even be investigated. And if we can just talk about crypto, the regulation of crypto is one of the hottest issues being dealt with in the executive branch now. So he is in charge of regulating something that is putting literally billions of dollars in his pocket. But regulating crypto is an official action of the executive branch. So under the decision of Trump v. United States, he can do whatever he wants. He can open a lemonade stand on the front lawn of the White House and take public payments in return for regulatory changes. But because that's an official action, he's immune from prosecution.
Well, that's such a ridiculous example. Like, the next thing you're going to say is that he would be selling commemorative coins for a UFC fight on the front lawn of the White House.
Yeah.
But that would never happen.
That would never happen.
Yeah.
Karen, do other countries look at what the UAE is doing with the president's crypto and look at what Qatar did with the jet and realize there is a very real way to put money in the pocket of the president of the United States? People who are looking for pardons certainly know there is an avenue to getting pardons this way as well.
Then there's the pardon scam. That's the other thing that's going on, that's happening, where he's getting payments or things to his political committees and things like that. And of course, the tech people knew this right away. You put in 25 million or 200 million, you get out billions in contracts. This is a paper play situation. And it's the question is whether you can't do anything about it because no one ever imagined someone could be this, greedy essentially on the public dole. And so we're all paying for it. Just like he said, everything was in the East Wing was going to be paid for by private donations. In fact, it's the public that's paying for that. It's the public who's paying for what's going on at the Kennedy Center and even the reflecting pool. This is all, it's coin operated is what it is. You put money in and you get stuff you need out, and everyone's onto it, from the tech people to the Kazakhs to whoever it happens to be. And that's what's happening here.
Now, if I can just add one point of possible accountability, the Constitution is still in effect, and the Constitution defines impeachable offenses as treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Yeah. This looks an awful lot like bribery. UAE puts in money, gives them a plane, gets stuff in return. The
Qatar
crypto business
gave him the plane, but yes.
Qatar was the plane. Try to keep track of all the grift, essentially.
Sorry, UAE is the crypto. I don't think, certainly the Congress in its current state of Republican control is not going to do anything, but bribery is specifically mentioned in the Constitution, and this looks an awful lot like bribery.
But at the end of the term, as Joe Biden pardoned his, family members, they'll just pardon everybody, proactively. And there's nothing, for people who think, well, afterward there'll be investigations and the like, there can just be blanket pardons, right, Jeff?
The president has already said I think in Maggie Haberman's new book, there's a line where he says, I'm going to pardon everyone who came within 25 feet of the Oval Office, or some words to that effect, that he's pardoning everybody so that if there's a Democratic administration, they can't prosecute anyone. Whether he actually will do that, who knows? But it's just indicative of the fact that the lack of accountability that we're seeing in the current administration is likely to continue regardless of who wins the next election.